Jason Miles is
Hey,
co-host of This Is Revolution, and hopefully, sorry to keep you waiting, my friend. You are a welcome addition to this crazy community. Thank you for joining us.
thank you. Thank you for letting me hit lead off.
Yes, and sorry for keeping you waiting. We're
No,
going to
no, no,
be.
no. I was watching the rant, and I too have my ranty moments. That's what this
Yeah,
little space is for.
I will hurt somebody if I don't. I will put my fist through a wall, and then the mice will come out through the hole in the wall. So, let's talk about a couple of things. One is you were on Ben Burgess's show. Give them an argument.
Did you?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So before we talk about your
Mhm,
video essay
mhm,
about Bill Cosby and
mhm,
the Showtime special,
mhm.
uh, I don't want to disagree with you, but let's talk about the use of the N word. That
Mhm,
Gone with the Wind.
mhm.
So when I was a kid, I used to watch Gone with the Wind, and I think somebody told me this wasn't the way it was. With
And you were like, "F that. This is the way it was."
Well, it's nicer to think that's the way it was. Uh, here's what was the N word. Did they use the N word in Gone with
No,
the
they
Wind?
did not. Apparently, the NAACP pushed back on the usage of the N word in the script, and they negotiated to use darkies instead. So um, I forget how many times darkies was used. Burgess might remember what Teray Reed had said, but they used darkies instead. So Ben recently cut a clip of the conversation we were having about a totally different movie. We're talking about Get Out originally, but if you ever get Ben Burgess, me, and Teray Reed in a room, the converse definitely me and Teray are going to tease Ben for a little bit, and then we're going to go off on these other tangents. And we went in on a tangent about the NAACP and the film studios negotiations of what that would look like to get a inward to darky ratio in the film.
Right, right. Uh, One of the misconceptions about pre-war Hollywood is that we didn't know, and yet when Birth of a Nation came out,
Oh, there was huge pushback on that from like Monroe Trotter and
who
W.
was Monroe Trotter?
It
Harvard
was
graduate.
yeah, yeah. Harvard grad. I believe he came out around the same time as Du Bois. Um,
And what was the
definitely.
pushback to? First of all, tell people, if you don't mind,
Mhm.
how horrific the Klansman was, which became Birth of a Nation. I know that.
which becomes Birth of a Nation. The Klansman is a book basically glorifying um, the Klan and kind of the ideas that you see in movies like Gone with the Wind. And Birth of a Nation is pretty vile film where the Klan is the heroes, black people, or just I think it's just white people in blackface, raping white women and kind of viewed as ignorant mongrel monsters. Um, who was the president at that time? Was it Woodrow
Woodrow
Wilson?
Wilson. Well,
He
he
showed it at the
screamed.
White House. Yeah,
He
he
showed
had a
it
special screening at the White House.
and said, "This is." He said, "This is it. It's catch." He called it capturing lightning on the screen. He said, "This
And
is."
that it was a big time book. I mean, I think we're there's a few things that we're not really capturing. Is that moment when the Klansman comes out? It's a huge book, especially in the South. And there were a lot of technological advancements in filmmaking when Birth of a Nation comes out. So Birth of a Nation is like the shit avatar of its time, right? It's doing things.
D.W. Griffith, right?
Yeah, D.W. Griffith. And D.W. Griffith grew up in an environment where, this kind of language was very, very commonly used. And he looked up to these people. I'm not saying this to give him any sort of pass at all, I'm just giving some historical context to the moment, because definitely, regardless, it's not like D.W. Griffith grows up in some sort of weird Tarzan world where he thinks all these things are totally right and just, because there is a massive movement to, ban this movie from the NAACP at the time.
Underreported story, because most people say Woodrow Wilson was a creature of that time, and looking back, he just didn't know. But he knew enough to segregate the federal government. Mm-hmm. After Plessy versus Ferguson, he segregated Washington, D.C. When he became president, Washington, D.C. was integrated. He segregated it. Mm-hmm. There was pushback. So what kind of pushback did, when you read about the pushback to Birth of a Nation, it makes Birth of a Nation even more horrific, because they knew that this was offensive.
Wrong, so to speak, offensive. Yeah. Yeah. I think when we look back at history, we tend to look back at it as like this flat line of everybody had the same mindset. We recently did a show about free people of color that actually owned slaves. Definitely some of them owned their family, so they kept their family out of bondage, and there were others that did not. There's, also Black people, free people of color that have owned property pre-Civil War. And right. That property has gone down generations and generations, passed on through generations. So it's history's a bit of a complex narrative, and getting into the weeds on Birth of a Nation is kind of an interesting story, because Monroe Trotter, if I'm not mistaken, is also part of that kind of talented 10th era of race management, which is somewhat problematic as well. Especially when you look at people like Booker T. Washington and the way he viewed Black education. So,
what do you mean?
And my co-host can go into it. I don't even want to get into it, because he would be so pissed at me, because I'm going to do it disservice, because he's been going off on these crazy tangents. He's actually writing an essay about it, about Booker T. Washington and how he's kind of corrupted quote unquote Black education through HBCUs for generations.
So let's talk about the Bill Cosby documentary. Is it my imagination? Did Kamau Bell go after Stepin Fetchit? Was he unforgiving when he was talking about Bill Cosby? Was he
again? It's
he unfair to Stepin Fetchit?
Again, it's through that lens of like, look, you've been doing comedy longer than I've been breathing air.
It
right?
seems.
I don't say that try to be like mean or fun. Like I'm stating the fact that you've been around this business for a long time. You've seen crazy ebbs and flows in this business.
Yes,
and
mostly ebbs.
So you said mostly ebbs.
Mostly ebbs. Many flows.
So there's some documentaries that put that first wave of Black comedy on a bit of a pedestal, like, well, these were the guys that had to get through the door so these other people could get through the door. And there's other people that definitely are just like, well, this was never necessary to do. So yeah, there's a little bit of like, he's not my guy kind of thing. And Kamau Bell also made it's not a I love Cosby piece, but it's definitely kind of I love the idea of what I think this man was piece.
Right.
So of course you have to crap on Stepin Fetchit, because
do we know how Stepin Fetchit was treated during his day? Because it was of a time when America couldn't get over the fact that we had immigrants, that that comedy was making fun of people's ethnicities and their problems learning the language, that it wasn't just Stepin Fetchit. Albert Brooks's father was Park Your Carcass, and he was a Yiddish comedian who kind of made fun of being Jewish, lovingly made fun of being Jewish and spoonerisms and not mastering the English language. And there was, Italian comics of that time. Do you think perhaps Stepin Fetchit thought he was of that ilk, where you make fun of, it's okay to make fun of yourself?
This is probably going to sound bad. I mean,
I'm just asking the question.
This is probably going to sound bad, but ultimately it's getting you in the door. And I'm not saying it's right by any stretch of the imagination, but it's getting you in the door and it's acceptable. And you're going to give people more of what they want.
Right.
When you get that big, you're giving people what they want.
Right.
You want to see me talk like this? Then you're going to talk like that. Right.
Right. So Cosby, a lot of young people don't realize that Cosby at one point may have been one of the most transformative civil rights leader in America. Is that a fair statement? That at one point, culturally,
I'd push back on that.
Because he wasn't black, you push back. In other words,
because Cosby wasn't black, he's black.
Well, in other words, a lot of people criticize him because he gave white people what they wanted, which was a black comic who was white.
This is what I'll say about that, and I don't think so. I think Bill Cosby gives you a conservative vision of successful black people. And I think he's always wanted to give you a conservative vision of successful black people. And that's a very black, almost nationalist vision of what success looks like. But in his world, it's been very, very multiracial, which is kind of one of the beauties of the show. It introduced me to people like Tito Puente. I only made a 15-minute video essay, so I couldn't really get into the weeds of it. I will say this. I thought this was funny. Malcolm Jamal Warner watched it, the guy that played Theo. and I guess he dug it. But we got to remember that Cosby's playing a spy, doing covert ops and I Spy during the era of COINTELPRO. And we have to also remember that he's not going against the grain like, God, now I'm forgetting his name, the other black comic of the same era.
Dick Gregory.
Yes, thank you. Oh, God, thank you. Almost said Flip Wilson. Dick Gregory. And Dick Gregory's, I don't even know if I would use the word dangerous, because they're both very, well-dressed. There's a similar delivery. But Dick Gregory is making fun of the racial era that we're in, the times that we're in. He's calling it out. And Bill Cosby is not. Right. I'm not saying he's not funny. I'm not saying he's not black. He's just not. The Noah bit that I put in the skit, I laugh at it every time. I had to, watch it 15 times before I got the cut right. And it made me giggle every time. Right.
Right.
We can't take away from the fact that he's actually a funny, talented individual. My issue is more so like parasocial relationships and the way that we look at someone like Cosby, especially because he's been pretty conservative throughout his career, throughout his life.
Right. Conservative in terms of telling black kids to, blaming, you're talking about personal responsibility instead of
personal responsibility.
Pull your pants up.
Because we have to remember where that show kind of takes place in a fantasy land. So the guy that writes the book about fatherhood, who becomes quote unquote America's dad, which I thought was like brilliant marketing, whether it's his people or NBC. I always found that really, really fascinating, because as New York is going through, as a New Yorker, financial hardship, the city as a whole, the state as a whole, crazy racial tension. The show starts off in '84 when Bernard Goetz shoots 3 black kids in the subway. We're cutting programs left and right in New York. There was no subway cops. You had the Guardian. Remember the Guardian Angels?
They're still around.
That's
Curtis
who was on the
Mayfield.
damn. That's who was on the damn subway back then. You was
Right.
and how reactionary are they?
Right.
So
They're vigilantes. They're glorified vigilantes.
horrible. I can't think of the guy's name that started him. Can't
Curtis
stand him.
Leland.
Oh, wasn't he? Didn't he? Isn't he running for mayor or something?
Yeah. He's got a radio show now in New York City. He's on the right, and it's so typical of radio. On the left, Anthony Weiner, the guy who got out of
Yeah.
prison. He's the lefty. He speaks the Huma Abedin's husband who couldn't keep away from young girls. That's who they. Oh well, that's who represents the left. No, nobody else can represent the left. It has to be the insane,
The guardian angel or the wiener man.
yeah.
I mean, I guess the way I see it, I'd like to think that Anthony Weiner is America's dad.
He was hands-on with his kids. He likes his kids. Joining us, let's bleed into this segment, if you don't mind, since we're running. Joining us is Professor Ben Burgis, host of Give Them an Argument, where you were just on. He is also the author of Christopher Hitchens, What He Got Right, How He Went Wrong, and Why He Still Matters. Go buy that book. Go buy Christopher Hitchens, What He Got Right, How He Went Wrong, and Why He Still Matters. Let's stay on the Cosby documentary for a second. Professor Ben, did you see the Cosby documentary on Showtime?
I did see. Oh no, I did not see the Cosby documentary on Showtime. I watched Jason's video about Bill Cosby.
You're not
but
missing
I
it,
didn't.
man.
I didn't see the Showtime thing.
How do we watch the video, Jason?
YouTube.com/This Is Revolution Podcast is.
So what did Kamal? I'm sorry, I stepped on that. Say it again, please.
YouTube.com/This Is Revolution Podcast.
Okay, I thought the documentary
Mm-hmm.
was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
What did I get wrong about Kamal Bell's documentary about Cosby?
I mean, there's a few things I really didn't appreciate. Number one, I never appreciate the whole he's leaving these breadcrumbs to tell you that he's a serial rapist. Ben, I don't know if you remember, there was a Cosby Show episode where there was this barbecue sauce that he had made. There's like it happened in 2 seasons. And the barbecue sauce, whenever you had it, it would stop couples from fighting and they would make love. And
Right.
they play this clip and they're like, he was telling us he was drugging people. Then they went so far as to say, do you remember what his profession was in the show? And he was a baby doctor, right? A gynecologist. He wasn't looking up at vaginas on the show. It's a family show. He's supposed to be the family man. So of course he's going to deliver babies and give advice to families. That was so disingenuous and painted this really ominous picture that was just silly.
And that does go to, one of the big points that you were making in your video, which is that, I mean, as simple as this is, I mean, you just like what somebody, like the persona that somebody puts out for the sake of entertainment or, whatever, like that's not, that's not them, right? I mean, like maybe it's them, right? But I mean, like that, there's no guarantee that it's them. I think people always feel the need to do this. I see this all the time, right? Like after someone becomes an official bad person, either for silly reasons or for sometimes extremely good reasons, like somebody turns out to be a serial rapist, people always do this thing where they say, oh, see, I always knew there was something off. It's like, no, you didn't.
Well, what about the Spanish fly routine?
That was a thing. Tone Loc, who you may
Funky
not
Cole
know.
Medina.
Funky, you know Funky Cole Medina.
I thought
There's
Funky
been-
Cole Medina was Colonel William Calley's boss who ordered the massacre in Mile High. Maybe it was a different Medina. Funky Cole Medina.
If that's what that song was about, then I'm going to walk to Los Angeles right now and hug Tone Loc. Song was
Okay.
about rape juice.
But the difference is Tone Loc was never accused of giving anybody.
Well, but that's the point, right? Because like if he was, he'd say, "Oh, aha, see, right? He was confessing in this routine," and it's like, no, he wasn't. I mean, I don't think Bill Cosby had any interest in people finding out that he was a serial rapist. I actually think that he was like very interested in people not knowing that
Yeah.
about him. And I think it is a little bit of an important point because there's this sort of widespread belief that like whatever like cultural expression someone has is a like inventory of their soul, right? You know, that's like that tells you who they are as a person, which both means that like if you're a bad person, you have to find breadcrumbs in the cultural product, but also that like this is also how, you know, Bill Cosby tricked everybody, right? Because they thought that like, you know, Dr. Huxtable was like really him, you know, and or for that matter, the character that he played, you know, the Bill Cosby character that he played after the show when he was like writing books about fatherhood and stuff.
His kids
You know,
weren't perfect. His kids, his daughter, I believe she passed away.
So, all right. So let's give Kamal the benefit of the doubt. He's a comedian, and that's kind of funny about the
He
Spanish.
wasn't trying to be funny. I don't think he was trying to be funny.
Okay, but this is a 4-part documentary. What else?
He had a budget. And he had 4 parts. And in this movie, they reiterate that this is America's Dad, and We're So Crushed was America's Dad. He never gets into the fact that Bill Cosby, with his own children, granted his son did get murdered, his own children had some drug problems that were public. And he doesn't even talk about it because it ruins the narrative of Father of the Year. And it's like, well, dude, apparently it wasn't 2014 or whenever the pound cake speech is. I got speeches from 1996 of this dude telling me to pull up my pants.
And don't steal the pound cake.
That comes later. But I'm saying in 96, he was saying, pull up your pants and stop naming your kids these stupid names. This is who he had become. Because as Ben says, and other people have said, what a great way to cover up the fact that you're going around, raping starlets.
But is he entitled? Let's take the criminal sociopathic behavior off the table. I mean, we can all agree, unless Professor Ben Burgess wants to debate, that drugging women and having your way with them is.
Yeah, if we are going to have a debate, I'd like to request the anti-rape side.
We agree that is bad. Is he completely wrong saying to young black men the same thing that Barack Obama said? Pull up your pants. Personal responsibility. I understand that it's not about personal responsibility. It is about systemic racism. It is about police. It is about locking black men up because of the loophole in the 13th Amendment, free prison labor. But is it completely wrong to preach assimilation?
Well, my pants are pulled up, but I do just want to say that that I think what's wrong with it is that it misdiagnoses a problem about the distribution of material resources as a moral problem about like underclass individuals, right? I mean, like that this is like that. In other words, like what's the message of the Cosby Show? Like, because they like it's essentially that the way, and like it's the same message as the 1996 pull up your pants stuff, right? I mean that like it's that you should, the solution is to whatever, it's like Jordan Peterson, sit with your shoulders shoulders straight and shoody and become a doctor, like Bill Cosby's character, and
is that the worst? Is that the worst advice to give to anybody?
Is it terrible advice for an individual? Maybe not, but I think it's terrible if you think that that's a solution to poverty, right? I mean, like you can't have upward mobility for everybody. It doesn't work that way.
I mean, I can only tell you my own true anecdotal stories, right?
Right.
And I am from a poor working class neighborhood in Richmond, California. You've lived in the Bay Area. I'm sure you know where Richmond is.
Chevron.
Yeah. And I got to go to school in a city called Albany,
Next door to
and
Berkeley.
right next to Berkeley. Went to school.
Kamala, I think Kamala Harris grew up in Albany, right?
I think she grew up in Berkeley, but probably close. If she did, I wouldn't be surprised because I went to school with a lot of PhD students' kids.
Right.
So I'm going to school with all these kids who have super educated parents. Everybody goes to college, black and white, right? And my black and white classmates, because it was the 90s, it was the style, we had our pants around our ass. We had big baggy pants and they hung around our ass, and that's just what we did. But not everybody can pull up their pants and just go get a job. Not everybody can do drugs in high school, not get arrested, not get prison record, can fight in high school, can cut class in high school, not get arrested, not get a record, and then go off and do pretty good things.
Right.
So to say that all you have to do is just simply pull up your pants is kind of missing the point. And you're making it all about the individual and not so much about the systems that these individuals may exist in. So while these individuals, you know, there is some personal responsibility people do have to take at some point, right? We can't sit here and say you can go through life robbing and stealing and beating the shit out of people and not think there's going to be any consequences to this shit. That's just crazy.
I've been okay, but sure. Yeah.
But if you're Bill Cosby, again, this is a guy.
All raping aside, right?
All raping aside. Yes.
All raping aside. Well, it's hard to, you really can't disentangle the rape from the politics.
We're speaking in the magical land of if, right? So let's just speak in the magical.
Yeah. So if Bill Cosby wasn't a racist, it would still be the case that he's telling people, you know, wasn't a rapist, you know, it would still be the case that he's telling people, like, the problem is that that, you know, because of underclass culture, you're not joining the middle class. And look, I mean, I agree with Jason. Like, it is actually, you know, I mean, one-on-one, sure, right? You know, that you, like, if you know, I have no problem with, you know, saying, like, yeah, you want to, like, if you know, encourage people to make good choices, sure. But the reason why you have people living in poverty is not because they were listening to the wrong music or because they weren't pulling up their pants or any of that, you know, or any of that stuff, right? I mean, like, it's
systemic racism, and the reason there's systemic racism is you need a permanent underclass of African Americans to mine. They mine African Americans for work and putting them in cycles of debt to pay the municipal expenses. We saw that in Ferguson, Missouri.
I'll raise you this, but I'll raise you this, right? Because it does happen. I'll raise you this. White kids were getting a similar message in the mid 80s, downwardly mobile. White kids were getting this similar message in the 80s with heavy metal music. And that's why they weren't doing shit with their lives. It was the music they were listening to.
Right.
There's always going to be an excuse.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, like, so I think
the depoliticization. Go ahead.
On the cultural thing, I would say, I think if you look at the history of a lot of white immigrant groups, at times when those groups, being recent immigrants, were, like, very poor, there were all sorts of narratives that people told themselves about that was because of their culture, right? And then everybody sort of forgot about it, right? Irish culture didn't really change. It's just that you know, it's just that Irish people weren't disproportionately poor anymore, so people didn't link the two things. And I wouldn't even say, look, I mean, I think that, you know, that phrase systemic racism could mean a lot of things, but I mean, the way I would put it is, I think the fact that the United States was, up until relatively recently, an apartheid country is why Black people are disproportionately likely to be poor. But the reason that the poverty exists, which I think is useful to disentangle the two, because I hope that our conception of a just society isn't that you have exactly the demographically correct proportions of each group living in poverty, right? That the poverty itself, you know, exists just because you need that, like, structurally
Capitalism needs it.
yeah, exactly. You can't like it doesn't, if everybody studied hard and and became a doctor and and had that nice house, then everybody would starve to death because nobody would be growing food. And,
Well,
and all
remember we had that in the 80s and through the 90s when there was too many lawyers.
There's always too many lawyers. Always.
I don't know if you remember that, Ben, when they were like don't even bother going. We have
the only time there aren't too many lawyers is the bottom of a ditch that you're about to pour lye into. And there's a shortage of lawyers. Is there any value?
How we do it on comedians? Are there the right number of them?
Can't get enough comedians.
Okay, all right. Sure.
Unfortunately, Shakespeare was being sarcastic when he said, "Let's kill all the lawyers." It was like, what do you want to do? Kill all the lawyers? It's always misquoted. He was pro-lawyer. But here's the thing. There are, in America in the 90s, middle-class people of color who are upwardly mobile and they there's no role model for them who says ignore where you came from, take yours and pull the ladder up.
But here's the thing:
there's no need for
what becomes there's the idea of a monolithic black culture. Right. When I say white culture, all of a sudden everybody goes, well, I have an ethnicity. And my culture isn't just this thing that you can call white. It's not that homogenous. But for black culture, for some reason, there always wants to be these people that define it in one singular way. And that's kind of what you end up getting with the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air after Cosby. Because the one thing Cosby does do, it destroys the inner city narrative, which is black life written through the lens of white Jewish dudes, right?
Right.
And then we get the Cosby Show, which the pushback on that show for a lot of time that was on the air was it lived in fantasy. And it lived in a fantasy, but the fantasy that people were critiquing was that it was a black lawyer and a black doctor living in the same house. Like, that's just crazy. And their kids weren't pieces of shit. Like, that's just crazy. So after he walks off stage during the riots, that programming is kind of done. So from then on, any programming, if you look at it, that exists around black culture has to always have a tinge of the inner city, because that has to be the authentic experience of black life, right? Moesha has kind of middle-class parents that are aspirational. D.L. Hewley has a show with middle-class parents that are aspirational. Family Matters is a show about middle-class parents that are aspirational, which would, again, because the dad's a cop, you get little sometimes tinges of this inner city life. But after Cosby, it kind of sits on its own as, well, this is what perfect family life is for everyone, especially black people. And
is that I'm not arguing with you. Mm-hmm. You're right. I mean, I come from a generation that believed wrongly that you're in America. This is why people liked Cosby. That's that everybody. Well, forget it. Haven't we just in general culturally turned our back on lower middle class people? Was it just African Americans who were in the hood that we were turning?
Brother, I'm gonna talk to you like Cornel West, brother David. There is such a resurgence of crack era glorification right now going on in media. It's blowing my effing mind. There's a prequel to New Jack City in the works.
Okay, but in terms of aspirational TV, I don't watch enough TV. Are we seeing? We used to see like All in the Family. We saw middle class, lower middle class families being depicted. Is that Do we see that on television these days?
Kind of, but weren't they? Wasn't Archie Bunker kind of surrendered to the Nixon generation? I mean, when you think about All in the Family, and I mean, again, me and Ben only know it through reruns. You know it because you were there. When you think about All in the Family and when it comes out, Archie Bunker's blue collar dude. Is he from Queens?
Yeah, Canarsie.
Okay. And his kids are kind of, or his kid and her husband is an idealist hippie that lives in a fantasy world. And that becomes the left.
Right.
Watch any movie from the 80s. There's leftists portrayed in movies like License to Drive. And they're just silly, idealistic idiots that don't understand the real world. And Archie Bunker is the real thing. So I think that real thing character does persist, especially throughout the 80s. He's a little more dressed up. He probably works in finance or the private sector. Growing Pains, the father's a private psychotherapist, I believe. It's the neoliberal Reagan era.
Professor Ben Burgess,
Mm.
is there anything wrong with presenting a fantasy world to a television audience to say, we know this isn't the way it really is, but for 30 minutes, we're going to give you an escape from reality? Is that wrong?
I mean, I used to watch Battlestar Galactica. I'm
Thank
pretty
you.
sure that that's, you know, further from
There's something wrong.
reality than the Cosby Show or any of the shows that we've been talking about. But
There's no
but
merit
no,
to
I mean,
something
look,
like
I don't think that's
the Brady Bunch,
I don't
the
think that's-
idyllic family that
Yeah.
doesn't.
Sure. I mean, that's fine. I don't have an issue with that. I do think it's worth thinking, though. I mean, enjoy what you're going to enjoy. That's, you know, that's fine, right? You know, but I do think it's worth taking a step back sometimes and thinking about what it is that you're saying, right? You know, like in other words, like is not because I think that, like, you know, anything that happens on television is gonna, you know, like that people are gonna, you know, have you know, become you know, that people are good. I don't, not that I expect like sort of good left politics to be spread by television, right? Like that's not an expectation here. But like I think that but I think it is sometimes worth like taking a minute and thinking about, like, okay, to the extent that it's not just entertainment, that there is something being said here. What is being said, and should we think about whether that thing that's being said makes sense, right? So I think that, like, look, I mean, is it nice to have, you know, whatever, parents who have good middle class jobs and live in a nice house and all that stuff? I mean, yeah, right, it is, right, you know, but I think with something like the you know, let me go back to the Cosby Show, like, in that was like the very first episode of the Cosby Show, right, where he's like yelling at his kid because, you know, because he doesn't, he's like, ah, Dad, you know, maybe I don't, you know, maybe that's just
Love
not
me
me.
for me.
You know, I'm not going to become a doctor like you know, like that's not me. Why don't you just love me for me? It's like, no, you shut up and study and be a doctor, you know,
Mhm.
like, okay, I guess the thing that I think is worth maybe thinking a little bit critically about is like whether the sort of basic message is that the problem with, like, the reason that people are living worse lives is that they haven't like studied hard enough, you know, that they could become a doctor. And I think that, you know, I mean, you know, maybe in some cases if you grew up in that household, but like in general, right? Like I think it's really important to realize that it's not, because this is and that this is a message that's not just in television. Like you mentioned Obama earlier, and Obama was like explicitly stating this message all the time. There's one of his State of the Union addresses. There's a line in there where he says the best anti-poverty program in the world is a world-class education. Everybody, you know, claps. And then, like, but you actually take 10 seconds to think about it. It's like, okay, so wait a second. So the idea is that, like, you know, the working poor will no longer exist because everybody's gotten a good education and, you know, and like ascended into the middle class. I mean, I think that like structurally that just doesn't work. I mean, not every cheerleader can be on top of the pyramid at the same time, right? You know.
And what do you do with people? What do you do with people who don't want to go to school?
Well, Obama rode that narrative all the way to the White House, and for 2 elections, that people just believed that because he was a colored kid with a white mom, that she was the fodder for a Lifetime movie, right? That she was some sort of working class single mom, and the story was definitely not.
Yeah. But let me ask you this, and we have to go to Howie Klein in 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. Obama and the daughters. I remember thinking they'll be, they're like Queen Elizabeth and Princess Margaret. They're American royalty. We have the Kennedys, and I always knew that the Kennedys were completely full of shit, but they were something to aspire to. It was the idea of the Kennedys. It was even the Bush family, the idea of the Bush family, and the idea of the Obama. Don't we need this fantasy?
No, we don't need monarchs. Keep your fantasy in the Star Wars universe if you want monarchs. Princess Leia is a great role model. There you go.
I know you're right.
I'll leave you with this. This. 2 fictional lands that got a lot of respect from Black people, to the point where there were people going to the theater in tears and dashikis for Black Panther. Fictional land of Wakanda is a monarchy. There's a freaking bloodline. Now, granted, everybody's supposed it's like the most technologically advanced country in the history of technologically advanced countries in the fictional land of Marvel, but also no one really tripped at the fact that the Black technologically advanced warriors were riding animals and had spears. People went to the theater in dashikis to see glorified Shaka Zulu.
All right. Who's your hero in real life? Is there anybody you model your behavior after?
Me or Burgess?
Both of you.
You go first, Burgess. This is a tough one.
Yeah, David Feldman.
Should model. I actually think people should model their lives after me.
Yeah.
He's got a house and good lighting, so he's doing something right.
I don't have a house. I have an air shaft. Don't you need heroes like Woody Allen, Chuck Berry, good family men? Don't we?
On everybody. No, honestly,
Did you say peeing on everybody?
I'll be honest with you. Even though I'm having some beef with the guy right now personally, my dad has always been someone that I look back on, things that he's told me growing up that have kept me very, very grounded, that have definitely kept me out of trouble. He was always involved in making sure I didn't fuck up too much. I got in a fight in school with a now friend, a classmate, and my dad was there with this kid's dad, and they sat there in the office with the vice principal and said, well, the principal giving us permission. If you guys really want to fight, we can take you off site and you can handle it at the Y, or you two can just shake hands and quit being punks about it. And, that's my dad. Right. So that's my hero. I hope to be able to have that level of understanding with my own children if they get into that level of trouble.
Jason, you'll come back next week?
If you want me.
I want you. Jason Miles is co-host of This Is Revolution podcast. Professor Ben Burgess, can we talk about what you've got planned, or just is that a secret?
Yeah, let's hold off on that.
He has a big announcement to make.
Oh, you can't announce it yet?
No.
Yeah, gotta wait a few days.
Also bad luck because he and I don't know if we're getting a boy or a girl.
We need to wait for the ultrasound. Let's.
Happy birthday to your wife. Didn't your wife just have a birthday?
My wife had a birthday like a few months ago.
Didn't she just have an anniversary?
Our anniversary is in July. I have no idea what year. There's Valentine's Day a couple weeks ago. Is that what
you got pictures of your wife all over social media. That's what it is, Ben.
Are you sure? Because I could have sworn I was.
Men don't realize you got pictures of your wife like you done fucked up all over social media with good ass glamour shots. So I don't know if you didn't take out the trash, whatever you didn't do, but you got the I'm sorry.
Professor Ben Burgess is author of Christopher Hitchens, What He Got Right, How He Went Wrong, and Why He Still Matters. Go buy it right now. I just blew my nose. I'm allergic to success, and you guys are making me very insecure right now. Thank you both. I hope to see you next week.
All right.
Peace.
Thanks,
Thank
David.